Thank you for joining, Panda. It's good to have you here. It's been a while since I've seen you. Probably, I think I saw you in February in Jakarta.
It was pre-pandemic. That's
So
what I
February,
remember.
February or March. I
yes.
think it was just before I left, before I was leaving.
I have a tiny little fact I need to share to you. You were my last hug. You were my last hug outside of my family. You were my last hug because afterwards we were all locked down. And when we hugged goodbye, that was right before the social distancing stuff. 6th of March, yeah.
I think it was. That was my last day. That was my last day in Jakarta. Oh, so sad.
Yeah.
But I've got to say, I can't honestly think, even for me, the last person I hugged to wasn't family since the whole thing's kicked off. So it could be my last. I don't know. So tell me about what you've been up to. What have you been working on over the past little while?
Okay, so I'm focusing on Blocksphere right now. I'm sure you know my company, Blocksphere.id.
I do, but I don't think that everybody that would be watching would. But just tell us a bit about that.
Okay, so should I just tell them about my background as well?
Yeah.
The other stuff I did. Yeah, I'm one of the co-founders of Blockchain Zoo. Before Blockchain Zoo, I spent several years in IBM, 6 years in IBM. I was always in enterprise IT. And transitioned to blockchain back in 2017. I've always been very fascinated about the blockchain as a technology, though. So even back in IBM, I was fascinated. I followed a lot of the groups, a lot of the Reddit groups. Anyway, so I started Blockchain Zoo back in 2017, along with 7 other people. And it was a multinational team. I was the only one who was Indonesian. The rest were Italians, French people. There's an American. There's a Thai guy. There's a Chinese guy as well. It's a multinational team. It was fun. Blockchain Zoo now has like around 60 employees. Then afterwards, I focused more on building the Indonesian Blockchain Association. So the Indonesian Blockchain Association was the first, I think it's still the only B2B association of blockchain companies in Indonesia. It was very political because it did a lot of B2G, like business to government relations, and basically bridged between the ecosystem of both blockchain technology and cryptocurrency and the government itself. I focus more on the technology perspective, though. I did do a lot of the bridging, like initially for the exchanges to get there. Like Indonesia used to be very crypto unfriendly. It became more and more friendly. It's not as friendly as it should be, but it's getting friendlier. But the association was actually part of that, part of the earlier conversations, and I was part of that as well. But I'm not a crypto person per se. I'm more of a blockchain technology person. I'm focused on enterprise IT. So me and a group of my friends who started the association, and also one of the persons who actually started Blockchain Zoo with me, whose name is John Daniel Gauthier. Shout out to John Daniel. We basically helped Blocksphere to transition into a Gartner listed company. So I actually have 2 Gartner listed companies. One is Blockchain Zoo and the other one is Blocksphere. Gartner, for those of you not know, it's actually for enterprise IT people. It's like the Forbes 500, I guess. It's a listing of the IT companies that can do things in a specialized area. So we were listed under blockchain consulting and blockchain service provider. So that's for Blockchain Zoo and also Blocksphere. Yeah. So anyway, I've been focused on Blocksphere though. It's mostly Blocksphere now. Simply because of lockdown, actually. The association, a lot of the. I'll tell you that later. So you were going to ask me something?
I was just saying. So what have you been working on? So what's been keeping you busy while you've been on lockdown in regards to blockchain sphere? Blocksphere.
So a lot of the Indonesian Blockchain Association activities have been way reduced simply because the government. Well, our primary responsibility was actually doing B2G stuff, right? Like communicating with the government. The government is refocusing its efforts basically on keeping the economy afloat, and they're doing a good job so far. I mean, in my opinion, of course, I don't want to be political, but they've been doing a really good job. But that also means that they didn't have time for like other initiatives that are related to stuff that are not directly related to the COVID-19 thing. We have done an initiative together with the Indonesian Chamber of, along with the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce, where we're basically donating from the blockchain ecosystem to those who are actually in the front lines of COVID-19, and also those who are actually suffering economically from COVID-19. We've been doing that as well, but the association, a bit, a lowered activity, I guess, because of the refocus on the COVID-19 thing. Now, Blocksphere, the idea is we've always been a company that we can work anywhere. Like, we didn't actually need an office. We have an office, but it's like a lot of us actually just work from home. And a lot of like our workshops, our design thinking workshops, and even our events, we can do those virtually. We have mechanisms like, for example, if you've ever done like a business analysis workshop or technology architecture workshop, something like that. It's usually done face to face through something called the design thinking framework. We do the same, but we've been doing it for a while as a virtual workshop. So we have mechanisms in place to do virtual workshops. I just finished a 2-day workshop with one of the largest Indonesian conglomeracies, yesterday and the day before. So Thursday and Friday, while we're recording this. It was focused on, of course, it's related to blockchain, but tangentially, because it's more towards customer ID integration within one consortium. So it's a conglomeracy, so it has a lot of companies within it, and it's linked together with sort of a customer ID paradigm.
Without getting into details of the consortium and without sort of giving things away that you can't, it might be a good idea if we can we explore, I guess, how this conglomerate is looking to use blockchain and why blockchain is actually useful, like a more useful tool than what is already out there, as a case study in the potential for the technology in a real world kind of way.
Sure.
So what would that
be? This conglomeracy actually has multiple lines of business. So one of the lines of business is vehicles, manufacturing, and but it's also related to financial, like credit providers, also related to group with, of course, very different interests. And now they have a bit of issue when they want to do a sort of a portfolio phase, as they call it, simply because all of their systems are different and the data do not work cross divisions. It's a very siloed sort of a philosophy that they've run with. This is actually common in Indonesia, by the way. A lot of times in Indonesia, even though it's one conglomeracy, one huge conglomeracy, has multiple companies within it. Within all of these multiple companies or LOBs, lines of business, there are very, very different silos and types of technologies that are implemented. Now, the idea is to redirect everything to more towards a customer ID perspective, which is more towards we're using a sovereign identity solution, custom solution, which we are customizing for them. And it basically provides a way for multiple operators and also multiple lines of business to work together to share data, but also maintaining privacy for the users themselves.
Okay, so to summarize that, it's sort of like, so by user, is that an employee or is that a customer?
The idea is that the primary control will reside in the hands of the customer. Yes, not the user within the company itself. So it's not controlled, like you've seen like all these issues that happened with like internal breaches, right?
Yeah.
Like even the oldest hacks are internal breaches. The Snowden was an internal breach. He was an admin there. So the idea here is to put the control still on the hands of the customer, so that this application that this framework, not an application, this framework and a backend that we're developing is something that if you go to I'm taking care not to mention the customer.
Yeah, exactly.
You go to one of the stores that they have. You buy a motorcycle, for example. You buy that with your you onboard your identity, and then you go to another store to buy a car, for example. Now, the car shop does not get your data before you come in, but once you are you basically tap in to the car shop, you can actually give permission to for the car shop to take a look of your entire purchase data, like your service data, etc. Now, how is this useful to the customer? It might actually help them in terms of actually buying the car on credit, increases their credit rating if they are good at doing the services thing. And it can actually lead to promotions as well. And of course, from the conglomerate's perspective, it can become a portfolio kind of play because you can actually do it cross lines of business. So you can actually check the customer behavior, not just from one side of the fence, so to speak, but also from multiple sides of the fence. Now,
yeah, but I mean, the data would still be anonymous. The individual identities would still be anonymous to the business. So they're doing analytics on, they'd be doing data analytics on, I suppose it'd be random addresses that would store data on behalf of a human being, but not actually know who the underlying human being is.
Exactly.
So it's, I mean, that, so, and it also means
two layers though. Two layers though. So one is the aggregate analysis of the data, which is what you were mentioning. The aggregate pseudonymous analysis of the data, in which you can actually take a look at the entire network data at the same time and then draw conclusions from it. So so the first part obviously is what you said, is basically the aggregate analysis of the data. But if you actually give consent for the company or one of the lines of businesses to actually use your identity, you can actually get a custom analysis based on your own profile. So this kind of analysis, of course, there needs to be incentives that cross back to it, and that the kind of incentives that they can provide as well. Now, the idea is if you provide consent for the company to use the data, then the data would be valuable not just for the company, but also valuable for you as well in terms of your user experience. For example, like you, for example, this company that this conglomeracy actually also has like service, like car service mechanics, basically. Now, the idea is when you go to a mechanic, you can actually get the data of your car, but if you go to another mechanic that is still within the same conglomeracy, then you don't have to rebrief the mechanic on what your previous service book was. Now, of course, in the enterprise, everyone, because you've already put it inside the system. Now, that is if you give consent. But if you don't give consent, then it's just aggregate data. It will basically, help the entire ecosystem, but not help you in particular. But if you give consent, then you can actually receive better services as well.
I understand. And I imagine that would flow through to other parts of that conglomerate business. So if they have, and I don't know who it is, by the way, but if they had, say, some retail outlets and they were selling iPhones, they had an Apple retailer. That would also mean that they'll be able to see, the whole history of what you've done with your Apple, what you've also done with your computer, and then maybe then they can whatever you've done with your car. If they say, well, wow, this person is literally a machine for this conglomerate that is just buying up everything that we sell, it would then give more benefit to the customer, more bargaining power, things like that. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
It could be a cross-brand promotion, basically. So if they do have. A retail arm. So yeah, that's
So
one of the
you would be
possibilities.
part of the conglomerate family, so to speak, and would hopefully would also allow you to have, you know, loyalty bonuses or, you know, whatever that would allow you to pretty much stay within their net, which is not a, I mean, it's not a bad play for anybody really, because I mean, like, you know, we all love our reward programs, and the bigger the company, the more rewards you can get from staying within that group, and the less of a need to move to another one. So I mean, it would promote both loyalty to a certain group, while also rewarding the customer for, well, that's the loyalty part, but then it would also allow certain businesses to be able to capture people within their family or their group. And then, you know, that would mean, you know, more attention, more repeat sales, blah, 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 blah. And obviously the cross-marketing potential, it becomes massive. And then obviously what you can do with the data is huge as well. So it sounds like a win-win. And out of curiosity, I mean, how long this is more from a blockchain technology perspective, how long, and I don't necessarily want to talk about cost because that would be proprietary, but how long will it take to roll out a program that will see from conception, from discovery from concept discovery, you know, when you do that initial workshop where you discover what the customer's problem is and you build a concept, how long will it take before that project will actually be live and usable across a group?
Okay, so of course it all depends on the group itself, but by Blocksphere's experience is we use only about 1 month to create sort of a prototype, non-functional prototype, but an interactive one that can be utilized. That prototype also has an architecture as well embedded to it, so it can basically be based on that architecture. You can actually do some deployment as well. That's within the first month. Now, the way these things work, usually in the enterprises, based on that initial first month, the IT team basically presents to their C-levels and and show to their C-levels what the end result of the what the end result of the product will be, which is based on that prototype itself. So the C-level will have a view that is more than just, you know, a report or you know, an architecture diagram, but also like a prototype of whatever we're trying to create. Now, after that first month, we usually wait for them to come back, and they usually come back within 1 or 2 months, depending on like the approval process. And we would be able to take around 4 to 6 months to actually have an initial deployment that is live. And 4 to 6 months deployment is based on the MVP, minimum viable product model. So it will be continuous improvement. After the first 4 to 6 months, there will still be improvements in terms of like, you know, the functionality and probably integration.
It will probably never end. A big group, the implementation will never end. It'll be ongoing for at least 12 to 18 months minimum, and then it would be tweaking after that. So, but I guess the reason why I was asking is because, you know, I've worked in the space a little bit, and I know that, you know, obviously sometimes these programs, like for example, a lot of companies that do say an SAP integration can take up to 2 years. So it's like, you know, I mean, that's a fairly, I mean, 6 to 12 months. I mean, you know, if you can get a product out, you know, in say 8 months, you know, with your MVP period, and then you roll it out, that's a fairly fast turnaround. And I guess the question I want to ask is, and you've worked in IBM, so I'm sure you've had experience with, in some ways, with something like a big SAP rollout. Is it faster to roll these products out in blockchain, or is it slower?
Okay. So to be honest, the way I do it is I hedge my bets by when I deploy the blockchain solutions that we deploy. We don't we're not that we don't deploy big bang solutions. We usually just choose one part of it as a fulcrum, sort of, for the entire rest of the solution. And the idea is choose one that we can deploy within the 4 to 6 months of a regular deployment. Like, for example, this one is customer ID. The previous one could be sort of a customer journey perspective. The other one, blah, blah, blah. So it could be KYC, could be payment systems, could be loyalty points, but choose one, but then let it grow from there. Because, you know, we're not SAP, and we're not IBM either. And And even IBM, even though they have trade lines and all those other solutions, those solutions work in conjunction with other solutions as well. So we don't do big bang projects in that sense. We do one piece of the entire play, but we deliver value with that small piece. And once they see sort of the value in it, we can expand further to other parts of the solution. And so, we try not to displace too much.
Okay, so I guess the question I want to ask is that, I mean, and this is pretty much a black and white question, is do you think it is, and this isn't, this is, I mean, I think there is no wrong answer to this and no positive or negative answer, but do you think is it, are we at a stage in the blockchain tech and especially in the consulting space and the underlying knowledge of the industry, are we at a space where these solutions can be implemented as fast or faster than existing solutions?
Okay, so that's a hard question. So it depends on whether you're creating a blockchain from scratch or are you moving into an existing blockchain consortium, for example. Now, when I say from scratch, it's not like I'm creating a new Ethereum or I'm creating a new Hyperledger. It's not like that. It's still based on existing platforms. But a lot of the like, for example, IBM has trade lines, right? Trade lines, Maersk is using it, and the Indonesian tax authorities, I think, it's using it. If a company wants to come into the consortium, what I know from Hyperledger design is it is designed to be deployed super quick. Like you can deploy you can come into a consortium that is already set up very quickly. Because it has Docker deployments, it has automatic integrations,
so
it has
what's an example of a consortium? Sorry to cut you off, but what's the example of a consortium?
Sure. Okay, so a consortium is basically the old definition of a consortium is a group of companies working together. So it's within either within a conglomeracy, for example, or anyone who's actually in a supply chain that is working together. But the new definition based on blockchain is companies that are in co-opetition. So they're in competition with each other within the same platform, but they are working together as well. Now, the idea behind what IBM is doing with trade lines is actually similar. So even though Maersk, I think, was the first logistics company to actually onboard, they are open to other logistics companies onboarding as well. And they are open to regulators onboarding. The Indonesian tax authority as a regulator is onboarding as well, for example. Oh, wait, is it tax or import-export? Oh, actually, I think it's the import-export. So the idea behind the current definition of the consortium is any place where there's actually competing interests, but they have to work together.
What is an example of a blockchain solution or a consortium that people can, like a blockchain consortium that people can piggyback on or businesses can piggyback on so they don't have to build their own blockchain?
Okay, so TradeLens is one of them, actually, the one that IBM
okay, so the IBM one,
yeah. That's actually why I brought that example into the fore. It's when you actually onboard into the blockchain platform that they have, and it's already an existing platform, you simply deploy Docker image in your infrastructure, and you join basically the consortium working group to basically get the policies in place. And there's a lot of discussions involved. There's a lot of politics involved. A lot of legal documents are going to trade places as well. But in terms of the technology deployment, it's going to be as simple as deploying a Docker image and making sure that the infrastructure is has good uptime.
Okay, and you were going to give an example of Singapore.
I think there are many other examples, but yeah. So another example of a blockchain consortium is one that was experimented on for Project Ubin. Of course, as you know, multiple banks, they all have competing interests because they're all banks. But between all of these banks, it becomes more of a co-opetition instead of competition. And it's more towards, for example, it's a common interest for all of the banks there to combat fraud. It's a common interest for all of the banks there to basically maintain the. So it's also in the best interest of all the banks to have a good RTGS platform, for example. So the idea is when a rising tide raises all boats, even though the boats are competing with each other, right? So the old definition of consortium is that they need to have like more partnership than competition. But the new definition of consortium with the blockchain paradigm is actually the more competition that these partners have, the more justification, the more value that the blockchain can bring to the table.
How has the current environment affected your business?
The business development have changed. We used to do more of our business development activities and events. Being part of the blockchain ecosystem and also the technology ecosystem. Both ecosystems love events. Well, basically used to love events just before the pandemic. Well, after the pandemic started and there were lockdowns everywhere, there were no longer any events. So we had to do something else. So we transitioned basically, and this is not a technology conversation, it's more of a business conversation. To build businesses and enterprise, we have to make cold calls, basically a lot of conference calls just to chase after possible deals. And of course, these are enterprise calls. So it's my day is fuller now, to be honest. Like a lot of my weekdays are full from morning to evening, simply because I have a lot of calls and some of them are including business development calls as well. Whereas previously I just go to an event and it's one to many, right? Like we see a lot of people and then people contact us. It's more of a, pull instead of a push, but now it's more of a push. I hired some interns to actually help do the cold calling. We are developing sort of a cold call scripts, multiple cold call scripts as well for multiple situations. So that part of the business has changed a lot. The activities, I don't think it's changed that much because the approach that Blocksphere has, once we actually have a deal, we start with a workshop, basically the consulting workshop, design thinking workshop, probably other kinds of workshops as well, technical workshops, architectural workshops, project planning workshops. That actually hasn't changed, believe it or not, because we are actually using a lot. We're really utilizing sort of a virtual whiteboarding applications. There are actually a lot of them. If you want the free one, there's Google Jamboard, but Google Jamboard kind of sucks. Sorry, Google, but yeah, it kind of sucks. The best one that we found was Miro, M-I-R-O. I don't know if it's Miro or Miro, but it's a huge whiteboard that everyone can work together on. Yep. And you can put sticky notes on, you can put diagrams on. It's actually a lot better than a regular whiteboard because you can copy stuff. And that really helps. I'm primarily a consultant. I'm not a coder. So in terms of, for the developers, there's not a lot of change. But for the consultants, it's actually better now. It's actually easier now to conduct workshops. At least from the technical perspective, it's actually easier to get, people's inputs, and especially since they're home. Whereas previously, when we want to do a workshop, we needed to schedule it around their working times. It's actually easier to schedule as well. So yeah, I mean, there's some good, there's some bad. There's a lot of adaptation.
Yeah, I guess at least you're still being able to, I mean, it sounds like you've been able to maintain your business and yet at the same time grow your team.
Yep, I've been hiring as well. I don't know if you've seen the ads for Blocksphere to be, but that's actually the reason I was hiring. I know what you're referring to. I was putting a lot of ads on LinkedIn for new employees. That's because we had a round of investment. Maybe you can put in the description later. There's a link. I think it's an Indonesian. Well, you can Google translate it. Anyway, so we just had a round of investment at the beginning of the year from one of the retail groups actually, called Wira Group. Just that group gave us money to actually help them do sort of their IT transformation and digital transformation as well. Anyway, so from that we started hiring. I think IT can survive without changing much because a lot of the things. In fact, I think IT companies can really cut the fat out of their operations. because like previously people don't realize at all that they can actually work from home, and then they can just manage their teams from home. They can do design thinking workshops at home. But now, because of the lockdown, people are realizing that they can. I'm predicting a huge drop in like the co-working spaces of the world. Don't quote me on that. I'm not an investor, but that's going to happen. A lot of people are going to realize that, you know what, I'm more productive now. And especially, you know, the developers and the coders, once they realize that they can use tools, virtual tools to actually collaborate, then they wouldn't need an office. They can just work from home.
Yeah, well, a lot of I guess commentators are saying that obviously the commercial real estate space is going to be in for a bit of pain, as you know, even in large corporates, you've got people that have been working from home 5 days a week. They've proven that you know what, I actually can still do my job from home, and productivity hasn't gone down, and and I think that a lot of people would have a look at their rental bills and say, you know what if we can cut this expense out? What if we don't need this anymore? I think that would severely, and you're right. I don't think that co-working spaces will die, but I think that the need for so many will decrease, because it's like maybe we don't need 5 days a week. Maybe we only need 2 or 3 to get that team time, that team face time that is still important. But maybe that's the way to go. I guess we'll have to see. And I think the biggest challenge will be faced by someone like WeWork, who has ridiculously high valuation, but yet could see a bit of a damage to their revenues after things get back to a bit more normal.
They're already facing a lot of damage already.
Yeah,
even before the pandemic.
There's a lot of negative press out for them before this whole thing kicked off anyway. But onto a bit more of a local front. Well, for you, how have you seen the space evolve in Indonesia, and what do you see coming up in the future, specifically Indonesia, because that is sort of your backyard at the moment?
So you've been my friends. We've been friends for several years, right? And when we first started talking, I told you about the possibility of projects happening. And the projects, of course, my view was more towards the enterprise perspective. And when we started about 2017, a lot of people still didn't know that, you know, blockchain can be implemented in the enterprise. And sometimes they implement in the enterprise, but they are not implementing it correctly. And there were a lot of failed projects that happened that are not in our portfolio, but in the ecosystem. And that was unfortunate, but it was a learning experience. We're seeing a lot more focus on the actual blockchain solutions that provide business value now, instead of, you know, just companies trying blockchain. So they're being more realistic with it. Like compared to like just a year ago or 2 years ago, where everyone was just doing blockchain either because their boss told them to try it, or because their boss read Forbes, for example, or you know, they're doing it because of ICOs back then. So I mean, it's becoming more towards. I like it actually as a consultant, because it brings it back to more traditional means of IT, as in, you know, how the IT industry actually is developed. There's always a new solution. There's always a hype cycle of always a huge hype cycle at the beginning that everyone just wants to try. Like think Dilbert cartoons, the pointy-haired boss wants Dilbert to try everything, even though he doesn't know what it's good for. But you know, a lot of people are now looking into more. You can say it's more traditional solutions, but based on the blockchain, instead of like the lofty solutions that are big bang but are not very possible or realistic. Yeah. So I think it's good, and the idea. The idea behind, you know, the regulatory perspectives as well. The Indonesian government, within the last year, we have, we have a central bank and we have a financial services authority, right? Like, so some countries have this. I think the UK has it as well. So there's the central bank basically manages the reserves, and also like the like the monetary part of it, but the Financial Services Authority actually is the authority for the rest of financial services other than payments. So the Indonesian Financial Services Authority already has a blockchain cluster that was starting last year. And of course, the association had a discussion as well. So there's a sandbox that is just for blockchain projects and blockchain technologies. I think that's really good. It's like they're trying. The Indonesian government is really trying to understand how to actually bring value to the nation by using blockchain, and also opening the door to like paving the way really to for companies to actually use blockchain, research blockchain. There's also a lot of startups that have appeared within the last few years that are doing blockchain, then putting blockchain in their value chain, their value proposition, basically. Some do logistics, some do farming, some do data farming. So there's now Indonesia is waking up more to the reality of the technology instead of the hype of the technology, which I like. It also means that I do a lot more workshops, like in-depth workshops, instead of training. Instead of sharing about blockchain. What is the blockchain? Nothing like that anymore. The stuff I do now is more towards, in-depth workshops on how to create a blockchain solution for a certain use case, which of course means that these are not stuff I can post on my LinkedIn yet, because these are all private stuff. But it's actually a lot more fulfilling for me, at least, than actually just going to events and talking, because you're actually doing something. You're actually helping create something instead of just talking about it.
Yes, that's good that that's finally happening. And how do you think? And I don't know how much travel you've been doing. Obviously, not much recently. But how do you think Indonesia stands up compared to the other ASEAN nations?
Okay, ASEAN or Asian? Because I was in China last year. I spoke at Mobile World Congress.
Let's do Asian then. Let's do broad.
Yeah, let's do broad. So in terms of Asia, when I went to China, I was China is huge. It's a huge market, and of course, I didn't get to see the entire market. But the people that I met there, most of them were still using. Most of them were still at the sort of the profit cycle, the hype cycle that basically ICOs and IEOs and crowdfunding and crypto and the rest of that. Even though there's a lot of I went there to talk on something, basically blockchain for technology. I was on stage with Stefan Rust, who's now the CEO of Bitcoin.com. So of course the context was there. The context was more crypto. Like they recognized Stefan Rust's name. They obviously didn't recognize my name. So perhaps the attendees were more geared towards that. But yeah, I mean, it's funny though, because a lot of the things that China has developed, even though they're not developing it via blockchain yet, like I'm not talking about the digital yuan. I'm talking about like the payment systems, ticketing, all of those things that they're doing, the tokens for loyalty points and Weibo, etc. And of course the digital yuan now. Those were already there. They were in place. A lot of the Chinese people were users of technology that probably have some blockchain behind it or can benefit from having blockchain behind it. But they're not talking about the technology yet. They're more talking about how cryptocurrencies. It was at the cryptocurrency stage.
But I think that most countries are like that. Like most countries, the forefront. I mean, because most people, most individuals, let's be honest, most people don't run a business. Majority of businesses aren't big businesses. So, a lot of businesses don't have the same problem that, say, your conglomerate, when we first started talking, have. And so the only way they can personally benefit from blockchain is via investment. And since you can't, in many cases, buy shares in these companies, the only way you can really profit is by buying their tokens. So
yeah, and I'm not
I
dissing that
understand
approach.
that.
I'm not dissing that approach. I'm not disrespecting that approach at all. I think it's correct. It's part of the ecosystem and actually funds the ecosystem. It used to basically the only source of funding for the ecosystem.
Okay, so you wanted to have a philosophical discussion about
Philosophical
blockchain.
discussion.
You wanted to get deep into some stuff. So let's go.
All right. So I don't know. I mean, the reason. So I was before the break. I was saying the reason I was so interested in blockchain is the potential for it to have us control our own data, as in the idea behind data control and data residency and also data privacy. Those are all theoretically the data belongs to us, but it's not really, because we are actually putting these sets of data in large databases. Even if we're not talking about Facebook or Twitter, we're talking about like Google Drive, for example. It actually resides on Google Drive servers. Yes, Google has encrypted data-to-data transmission, server-to-server transmission of data. Yes, but it's not something that you own. It's not something that you have. Now, of course, this does not mean everyone should just go back to the PC era and just put all of their data in their own devices. But there needs to be sort of a policy. There needs to be a way to. There needs to be an awareness in the public itself to actually have control over your own data. I think it's starting to form. We are starting to realize that Facebook and Twitter monetizes us, like we're their products basically, because they show ads to us, they analyze our thoughts, they analyze our buying patterns, and they sell to us, which is silly.
Well, yeah, now, the overlying thing is if the product is free, you're the product.
Yes.
If the service is free, you're the product.
Yeah, I remember that quote. I wanted to say that quote. I couldn't quite remember it because of the drinks. But
that's okay. I mean, I get better after I drink, so it's all good.
Okay, cool. We're balancing out. All right. Okay. So yeah, like even Tim Berners-Lee, the guy who created the web itself. He's the inventor of the web. Back in 2018, I guess, 2 years ago, maybe, he made several statements about how the web was now too centralized, like controlled by multiple large companies, and he was talking about the web and also about social media in general. He made a few initiatives. I think one of them is called INRUPT, INRUPT. I'm pretty certain it's INRUPT. It should be Googleable. Let's check later. We can find the link. But so Tim Berners-Lee, the guy who invented the web, is saying that the web has not followed this vision because he wanted the web actually to be decentralized, right? And for people to actually have control over their own data. So the idea being, if we're actually talking about having these social media applications, also having payment systems embedded in us, and all of these KYCs actually being stronger digital than they are physical, then the people who control the data actually have a lot of power, don't they? I mean, we already see that. I mean, even in the political discussions, and not to get political here, but the deplatforming of certain individuals, whether on the left or on the right, that's not correct, and that shouldn't be correct. That shouldn't be considered correct at all. But based on the very structure of these companies, of these social media companies, that's something that is inherent as an inherent flaw to the system, because the control resides on the ones who actually maintain the servers, who hold the servers in their hands, who have access to the, who have access control to the system itself. So I think, I remember your first interview was with Steam, right? Like I place a lot of hope.
I was going to say that Steam is one of those systems that, but I mean, that is still not without its flaws. I mean, in Steam, if you hold enough tokens, you can actually influence, so you can buy influence on Steam or Hive, whichever one you want to choose to go on. Probably Hive, just due to the political side of it. But I mean, yes, it is better than, say, having one person or a few people in a company like YouTube that will basically say, this is what meets our community guidelines and this doesn't. Whereas Steam is a little bit more democratized. But the problem that may happen, and we have seen it with the attempted corporate takeover of Steam and then the fork into Hive, is that when you're backing something that can be controlled by the accumulation of tokens, you're still allowing that power to gravitate towards certain individuals over time, and then it becomes centralized. Exactly. So, I mean, I don't think we've yet reached the correct model for that, because and I was actually going to say, I was actually going to bring up this comment before as well, but you still do need that. The unfortunate thing is that, when you democratize things, that leads to certain problems. And then when you have basically an autocrat, that also leads to other problems on the other side. So, I mean, it's important sometimes with these large scale operations, it's important to have a CEO or someone at the helm that can say, this is the vision, this is where we're going. Whereas sometimes when you end up with a democratized system, you end up going nowhere because no one can agree on anything. And I think that's where the real philosophical problem is with these systems.
It's a trade-off between two models, basically.
What's going to be better, which is why we've sort of arrived politically where we are, where we have democratically elected leaders for a certain period of time. So it's like, okay, you can lead the country, organization, whatever, for X period of time. After 3-5 years, whatever, we're going to have a review. You can get voted out. You can get voted back in. And that's why, for example, that's why I say no matter what you say about the American political system, I think it's better than the Australian political system, because we have a 3-year term as opposed to a 5-year term that they have or a 4-year term they have in the States. Because the longer that you are able to stay in power, the more you're able to enact your vision and not have to worry about the next election. Whereas here we've got a 3-year election cycle. So after you've gotten into power, you've got 6 months to settle in, 12 months to do actual work, and then 18 months to then plan your next election, which is just insane. However, the one thing relative to crypto I want to build up is that you mentioned that the guy who started the internet has sort of seen his vision distorted over time. It's now becoming too centralized, blah, blah, blah. Do you think that the possibility exists that the same thing might happen with Satoshi's vision of Bitcoin, that what he imagined it would be, which was a peer-to-peer payment system, because of maybe some flaws in block size and things like that basically we're never going to hit a point where, unless there is a block subsidy, which is what a block reward is. The block reward is a subsidy for when miners are eventually going to be able to earn fees. They're going to be able to live off transaction fees, considering the low amount of transactions that can fit into a block, and the fact that, in order to make miners profitable in, say, another 4 or 5 years' time, when there's or in 4 years' time, there's another halving, is the blockchain network actually going to be able to sustain like enough profitability for miners to keep the entire network going? And that's where I have a look at some like times like that, when you look at that and you're like, wait, we need to put more blocks in, otherwise this whole thing's not going to be profitable. That maybe it would be a good idea to have a CEO as opposed to a mythology behind your founding.
Blasphemy, but okay.
Yeah.
So let me respond to that. But I want to respond to something you said earlier as well. So that's why I said that customers should have awareness of the importance of decentralization. Simply because, like at the beginning, you said like Steam, Hive, all the issues with the fork and everything. That's based on literal capitalism, right? Like you have more capital, then you have more control, and the control that you have basically translates over a control over a set of a subset of the network that becomes its own network. Now, the thing is, the common customers, and I'm also grouping traders into it as well, they don't care about the importance of decentralization. Most of them only care about profits, or basically at least this site is running. At least I have some features, and that's I think that's the primary issue, is that we don't have sort of awareness. We don't think that it's important, but it is.
We're talking about two things. One was I made two comments. You were talking about ownership of data, and then there was another point, which was my Bitcoin comment that you needed to respond to. So let's go with your ownership of data. Was that what you were talking about? People need to be aware of the ownership of data?
Yeah. Well, actually, more aware. So what I actually said was people need to be more aware about the values of having a decentralized system, taking care of their data, instead of a centralized system that controls all aspects of their data and might misuse it. Right now, even in the blockchain community, that is not universal. And I'm referring to like even the traders. Most of them are aware of it, that they don't act upon it because they're not incentivized towards it. They're not incentivized towards decentralization. They're incentivized towards their the value of their own tokens. And the regular user, the people who are actually using Steam just to do the things that they're doing on regular social media, they just care about the feature function. They're not thinking about the things about the data ownership and who controls the network, and whether censorship is controlled by one person within the network, one rich person within the network. I mean, it might not be an issue now, but it could be an issue in the future. So I think we need to actually still focus about the values of the decentralization part and communicate it very clearly to everyone, especially those who are actually having data within these social media applications. And because it's not just social media, the world is changing really quickly. People are in space. Well, people have been in space. People are back in space because of SpaceX. But also, the Neuralink is coming soon. Elon Musk said in Joe Rogan that it will reach production in 5 years. Of course, it's going to be limited production. I assume that that's a brain computer. That's brain computer interface, man. That's going to connect the data in your thoughts to probably it wouldn't start like that. It probably will be used to help disabled people, etc. But it's going to head towards that. It's going to head towards a time where you control your systems through your thoughts. Now, if that happens, then there is a system with access to your thoughts, and if it's still controlled by a centralized system that you don't have access and control over that data, then people can read your thoughts. The rich can read your thoughts. It sounds weird, but that's true. When we're not even talking about, like CRISPR and all of those other the bioinformatics stuff. We're already sequencing our DNA by sending it to 23andMe and all those other startups that sequence your genes. We send them and we pay them like $70, $50, and then I'm Asian, or apparently I'm 1/8 Spanish, for example, right? But the thing is that data is worth a lot more than $50, and you just gave it to them, and you're not getting money out of it, but they're actually partnering, like 23andMe, I think it was 23andMe, one of the companies. Basically, it was found out they partner with pharmaceutical companies in order to sell that set of data, and that's those pharmaceutical companies use it to create medicine. You're not seeing a cent of that medicine. You're not seeing a cent of the profits from that medicine, for example.
Yeah.
That is your data.
Just so people know that 23andMe is the company that does the genetic testing. So you take the spit swab, and then you send that back, and you find out that you're 7% Neanderthal. Your ancestors are from somewhere, and blah blah blah. So just in context, every time you do one of those tests, you pay $100 or $200 or something for the test. You spit in a thing, and they come back, and they give you this feel nice genealogy report, but really you're paying a company to sell that DNA data to pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah. So and even like if you go let's say we don't go 5 years, we go 10 years, we go 12 years, we go 20 years. Brain uploads will happen, man. Like even now there are a lot of deep fakes of like, I can have a bot that acts like me. I mean, that's Joe Rogan has one. Someone created it for him because he has a lot of video of him, of course. But of course, that bot, that Joe Rogan bot, does not have his mind. Of course, it's just basically special effects. But with the Neuralink, wait 10 years, people will create applications that just read your brain and just, oh, this person, maybe it will start by, I'm the only person who knows what kind of dresses I like, what kind of suits I like, what kind of, what kind of games I like, for example. And I might not have time to shop, for example. And I send over an intelligent agent that is programmed with the contents of my head, basically, the stuff that I like. And I have a personal shopper. It might start with that. But it'll end with basically a set of a model of your mind that resides somewhere. Hopefully it doesn't reside in a server that is owned by someone else, and you don't have access to that data or the ownership to that data. Because otherwise you might find yourself in 2050 walking into a 7-Eleven, and behind the counter you see a bot that looks like you.
Yeah. Well, we actually, I was at a,
would you like fries with that?
Yeah, I was at a conference in Malaysia once, and we actually had a debate on this about whether or not that would be a good or a bad thing, because it's like, how much do people value convenience over ownership of their data? Like the average human being, is it that you could go to your local grocery store, or I think over there, I mean, here in Australia it's like Woolworths and KOLs. Over there I think it's what is it, Carrefour or Indomart?
Carrefour, yeah, okay.
Carrefour, like the big one, or Indomart, or whatever.
The large supermarket. Yeah.
And then you could basically, you walk in there and they'll already have your order ready to go. It's like you just walk in, it's like, hi, yep, we knew you were on the way. Your order's ready. This is everything that we think you need. Check it. If you need anything else, whatever. Okay. Then if you change the order, that would change the database, and then they would adjust that. They would adjust the buying habits for the next time. You get to a point that if any time you leave the house, the store that you go to will know what you're going there to buy.
I get it. I'm not a Luddite. I'm not a Luddite. I mean, I like having. Why am I holding this remote? I actually really like. That's a gadget. I really actually like having those services. Of course, everyone likes having convenience, right? But my vision of a future with those systems also has an opt-out. Like, if one day I say that, okay, I'm no longer shopping at Carrefour, I'm shopping at Giant, for example, and I'm no longer shopping at Carrefour. Carrefour cannot have my data because they suck, because I don't know, I don't like their CEO or something. I can basically rescind their access to my data and make sure they don't have access to that data anymore. Do those systems exist? Not 100%. You can still have, of course, data can be copied. They have access to my data once, they have access forever because they can copy it. Sure. But in the future, it might. It can actually be created if the entire computer network is more decentralized. You can actually have a control of data that resides really in the hands of the user. And this is not just, giving the data, but also removing access to the data as well. And that, I think, is more. So one crazy thing that I keep on thinking, I don't know if this has been said, but if we have brain uploads, again, 2050, 2060, I don't know, we might be old people, but if we have brain uploads, the only way we we would be piles of data, right? Like, we would be a model, but that's a pile of data, basically. The only way for a pile of data to own something and own itself is if the system is decentralized. Think about it. If the system is centralized and it's on some person's server, even though we have an account there and we control that account, we're not controlling ourselves. We're not controlling the data. The data could be, wiped. The admin can wipe it. Yeah.
You're still. I mean,
yeah.
essentially, if it's not decentralized, you're still at risk of human interference.
Yes.
And
yes.
obviously the pursuit of profit, which is fairly strong in our psyche. Yeah, that people need to make sure that they have sovereignty over their data, and that these systems, that we're basically that the biggest threat is that if we don't prepare the framework now, that the systems that will come in the future will basically disadvantage the individual if not appropriately managed.
Right. Correct. And the idea is it's not the far future either. I kept on thinking about like the lofty things like brain uploads, brain computer interfaces, but you know what? Even your genetic data that's already out there, your purchase data. I mean, a lot of people should be more aware. And also, like when we're talking about democracy and the way politics are constructed and the way our views are formed, we're also talking about the control that the social media have over our data and how we respond to things. I'm pretty sure they have like very primitive models of you and me within Facebook or Twitter.
Well, everybody knows that basically if you are privy to, okay, so crazy example, but we won't annoy many people by saying it, but if you're an anti-vaxxer, you're part of anti-vax groups, you'll generally only be fed. Now, specifically anti-vax, I don't know, because they have their own things behind this. But if you're specifically an anti-vaxxer and you're one part of anti-vax groups or whatever, it's more than likely that most of the news you're going to get is going to be from the viewpoint you already support. So, for example, if we're going to go politics, it's going to be if you're of the left wing, you're going to get mostly left-wing data. If you're from the right or conservative wing, you're going to get more conservative data. So depending on what you consume, they basically just give you more of what you would normally consume. And the main reason for that, I mean, I don't think is political or ideological, is because as a human, if you're seeing information that you support or that you believe in, the more likely you're going to keep eyeballs on that screen. And the whole idea is to keep as many eyeballs. I mean, because Facebook, Twitter, I mean YouTube as well. All these systems, they're set up to make sure that you spend as much time as humanly possible in front of the screen, in front of the phone, absorbing the information they're presenting to you, because that gives them more opportunity to advertise, more opportunity to collect information, and so on. So, I mean, that's the main reason why they do it. So how do you think that? How do you think?
But if I can add, okay, sorry. Go ahead. I
was just going to say, how do you think that decentralization will solve that problem?
Now, it is actually already solving that problem by basically changing the means of monetization. As in, we go to what was it? What's the D-Link? Is it the stuff that PewDiePie uses now that he's doing for streaming? I forgot. Or Steam, for example. What's it called?
It's D something. D something.
So the idea being.
But then YouTube then apparently went to him and said, "Come back to us exclusively, and we'll give you a bunch of different things." So.
Yeah. But I mean, that's an example. But that is at least that is at least an alternate model. Now the thing is, because we have an advertising model, we have news bubbles. Because we have a model that's based on eyeballs and actually looking at articles that agree with us, actually makes the eyeball stay longer. That created the mess we're in. The way the world is divided right now. I'm not just talking about the U.S. But that is actually a direct result of advertising monetization. To be honest, because we're actually being monetized as advertising actors, and also being monetized as people who are consuming advertising and buying actual things based on the advertising. Now, that is the system that was created whole cloth when the World Wide Web started, well, years after it started. But I think it's flawed simply because when you do monetization in that way, you're actually being devalued, in my opinion, because you're you're not getting, you probably get good user experience because you're actually seeing things that disagree with you. But it's not a drive towards unity. It's actually a drive towards division. And people are inherently tribal. We really
because
like our tribes.
if you start slightly right or left and then you see more, then it pushes you to either extreme.
Yeah.
Because you're only seeing stuff that supports your view rather than challenges it.
Right. Now, there are multiple ways to, like, I did a thing like 3 years ago, just for fun. I bought the domain nobubble.news. It's defunct. You shouldn't try it now. But nobubble.news, and just followed all of the RSS feeds from the right wing websites and all of the RSS feeds from the left wing websites, and just put it on the website and randomly sorted. Like it's not right wing first or left wing first. It's randomly sorted. So you can read through the entire thing and find out if you live in the bubble or not. Like if you think that most of these news piss me off, then you know what? You live in the bubble. There's a bubble around you. Now, that was an experiment, but that's something that could be done like very easily. And then in terms of the monetization, we can do sort of a crowdfunding model, for example, not an ICO, but donations. Make sure that the system runs itself. It's no longer controlled by me even. And the RSS feeds include all the RSS feeds from the right and the left. Every time there's a new left-wing site, there's a right-wing site added to it. There should be ratings to determine whether it's right-wing or left-wing, stuff like that. I mean, even a simple idea like that can actually do a lot of transformation and make it like it becomes the RSS feed of your phone and get your news from your phone, from that RSS feed instead of Facebook. That would be a game changer. That would actually change a lot of the advertising dollars.
Would it be? I mean, in that scenario, would it be ideal to even label it left or right or any kind of classification? I mean, if you're going to have it, then it means that if you see something you're like, oh, this is 3 stars right or 4 stars left or whatever, you're going to then go in with a bias. Whereas if it's just like this has just come out, obviously, if you look at it, obviously you'd probably have to mute which source it came from as well, because obviously if it's part of the Murdoch realm, then it's going to be right wing. If it's part of anything else, then it's going to be whatever. So I'd probably say that chances are you need to keep both the source and the political leaning of it anonymous, so that people are just going, I don't know where this is coming from, but this is a story. Because then it's like, well, you don't know, am I being manipulated or not? But then the idea was that you would be beaten by both sides into the middle.
Right. The idea is centrism. Yeah. The idea is not just centrism for centrism's sake, but to get the truth, you need to actually go through a lot of bias these days, whether a left wing or right wing bias. And there's not a lot of news sources that are neutral these days. I personally think The Hill is actually doing well. I mean, this is unrelated to blockchain, of course, but the rest of the news outlets are irritating. But going back to this,
but that's a fair observation. But I mean, I think that the issue is, there's always going to be a human component because as human beings, I mean, like if we're going to break it down to brass tacks of our own psychology, in my opinion, anyway, we're either storytellers or we all love listening to stories. That's how the best information is always portrayed. If you're trying to teach someone something, you tell it in the frames of a story, and people will absorb it and be more open to the ideas presented. And that's how, if you have a look at how, you teach early stage education, a lot of it's done by stories. That's why, your Hansel and Gretel's and all these old fairy tales are so popular to teach kids lessons. And I think that, although we grow up, we don't grow out of that particular frame of learning. And so when you're reporting the news, if you're just going to report the facts, the issue is that people don't watch. Or people will not stay engaged. Whereas if you frame it in a story, it's far more engaging and people will absorb a lot more. Now, the issue is the person writing the story in order to make it a story. And that's why it's called the news story. they have to, you know, in creating this story, they have to create a narrative. They have to create some kind of view that is going to be part of themselves. I mean, like essentially when I'm writing a story, you're going to frame it a certain way. There's going to be a hero, a villain, or whatever. And I think that that's the issue, is you're adding in a human element because that's how we learn from each other. And then trying to eliminate that human element means that people will not absorb the data anyway.
I don't think we should eliminate the human element. I think we should work with the human element. I might not be smart enough to know how, but we should. Now, the idea is do something that is very akin to the way economies are constructed. Capitalism based on libertarianism, capitalism, basically liberty in the way we do business, that basically has created the world that we live in today. I don't care if you're a communist or a socialist, capitalism still built the world. Without capitalism, we wouldn't have a pencil. Like the lead in the pencil was constructed somewhere. And, you know, it's all based not on forcing people to do things, but incentivizing them to actually do good. And incentivizing them means giving them money in the capitalism sense. But, you know, in a system like this, maybe it would be other kinds of incentives. It could be money as well. Right now, we are only thinking about money because that's all we know. We're translating capitalism directly into a system that is decentralized. So that's what we provide. But there are other benefits as well. Maybe there are other valuable things that we can do to construct this system. I'm not saying we ignore human nature. I think we should work with human nature. And it might be just a seed of an idea. It's not even an idea yet. But
I think it's important to discuss these things because it's about understanding where the value of the technology fits into where we may be in 5 to 10 years. There's no problems with that. But I think it's also, we also need to, and this is, I guess, the issue with a lot of tech people, is that, I'm not putting you in that basket, by the way. I know that you're not just standard tech, but I mean, the issue is that the world doesn't operate in this black and white. This is how things need to be done and needs to be fair. And this is back to my first argument, which is about, you know, the holy Satoshi, is that the issue is that the what you start out with, and I've got to say it's both the blessing and the curse of Bitcoin, is that what you start out with isn't necessarily going to be hold on, I'm just going to look at something here. Isn't necessarily going to be although he's kicked a ball. It's like kicking a ball at a soccer post that is 4 kilometers away. And it's like the amount of accuracy that he would need to hit the exact goal is assuming that the ball is not affected by gravity and it's not affected by, air density or anything like that, or friction. I think if it just travels straight, it's incredibly a low chance that he's going to be able to kick it. So it's going to need corrections along the way. Now, the biggest issue with the network is that, like I've said, if you have a look at how Bitcoin has worked, and it's the blessing is that we all know how it's going to roll out over the next 100 years. However, the issue is that the way that it was originally designed, is in this, X many transactions per block, 1 block every 10 minutes, blah, blah, blah. It was still an experiment. And we still haven't hit a point where, where there is even consensus among the Bitcoin or the blockchain community about what Bitcoin is supposed to be. Is it a peer-to-peer cash system? Is it a store of value? What is it? And so it can no longer be a peer-to-peer cash system because the amount of, the transaction time is too slow. Lightning Network may help, but then there aren't enough transactions per block. How are miners going to earn fees once the block production subsidy runs out? And then where are we going to be in 20 years when the block reward is like sub 1 Bitcoin? Bitcoin has to either be astronomically high or transaction fees have to be large enough to support mining farms. Or the amount of miners has to decrease to a level where it's no longer decentralized. So there's all these things that if there was if there was a guiding force or a ruling body, that they'd be able to say, okay, we need to adjust the network to this. Now, I would probably argue that trying to convince the entire Bitcoin network to fork in one direction or another is going to be physically impossible. And this is where the issue with democracy then comes in. It's like, well, how do we manage that?
I think Satoshi opened the door, and we've entered that door. And the way we continue that journey is up to us. And the thing is, blockchain is not based on crazy new technology. It's based on multiple combinations of old, mature technologies. I mean, we usually say this in context when we're speaking to banks, right? Like, you already have peer-to-peer, you already have cryptography, you already have databases, you already have even consensus models for years and years and years. And that's what we usually say. But my point here is basically, okay, this is going to sound like blasphemy, but the importance of Bitcoin does not determine the importance of the blockchain as a class of a technology. In fact,
absolutely not. No.
The maturity of the blockchain ecosystem will come once blockchain as a technology is more valuable and is recognized as more valuable by more people than the cryptocurrency aspect. And that includes Bitcoin, it includes all alternatives of Bitcoin and all the shitcoins out there, obviously. But the idea is when we're talking about technology, we're always thinking about like what the business value is. And back then, Satoshi's vision might have been basically a payment system that it's capable of so much more. But of course, with a different business value, that means there's a different design. So I don't think it's a question that we need to ask. All respect to Satoshi, wherever he or she is. It's not a question we need to ask. It's a question we need to answer. And, I mean, the ecosystem needs to answer it.
Yeah. And I think it's also about, it also is about watching to see how the industry itself evolves over time.
Exactly. I mean, I'm if I can make a comment, I like that a lot of the companies are actually coming into the fray, like the large companies, the large players, Microsoft, IBM, etc. But did you notice who's not actually coming into the blockchain space strongly? Google, right? Now, I'm not saying that this is not something against Google. I'm pretty sure they have researched blockchain. They don't have a blockchain product of their own. Why? Because they already run a system that is massively decentralized. If you go into a Google App Engine or Google Cloud Platform, GCP, you have the SLA that is based on massive decentralization that is throughout, that is basically global, that also maintains their servers. You make a query on their Hadoop, BigQuery, it can connect to multiple nodes all over the world. It's already decentralized. The issue is it's a decentralization that is owned by one company.
Yeah.
I'm not saying Google is evil. It's not. They're probably very good people, but a system like that has the potential to be evil. If that kind of that level of decentralization is created on top of a system that is owned by everyone in a capitalistic manner, not in a communistic manner, not like, happy, everyone own one. No, everyone still gets incentives for actually running a node, but it's the same scale as Google. Can you imagine what kind of a world we would live in? It would be massive.
And I agree with you that the big risk with Google isn't necessarily the current management or the current staff or the current company. It's the same way that a monarch works. You don't know who the next king is going to be, or the way in which the culture of the organization may shift over the next 10 years, or 20 years or 30 years or whatever, and we don't know where we're going to be. So by putting in a decentralized model at the start, it means you pretty much avert the risk of that happening.
Right. No, the issue, my point, but my point is when people are asking, do decentralized systems work? I can answer them that we already run a decentralized system. A lot of companies already use a decentralized system. Google is actually very decentralized. If you actually look at the architecture, it's decentralized. But from a policy perspective, it's controlled by one company.
Yeah.
So the system technologically works. Capitalistically, we need to find a way to make it work.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. Oh, good. Well, that was it. I think that's a good note to end on, because we're cracking on almost 2 hours now. After we take out break time, which will probably be about 45 minutes, but that's still going to be a good hour and 15 minutes. But no, this has actually been, I'd probably say this last talk that we've had has been one of the more interesting ones that I've done so far. So we should definitely do this again soon. But I guess maybe I'll put up maybe four or five questions so that we can just have 4 or 5 parts, and then we'll just go hammering tongs for the period. But this has actually been really, really fun. But hopefully we can maybe do drinks again in a couple of weeks. But yeah, thanks again for having me, and or for being on. And
thanks for having me.
Any other last comments you want to make before we close up for the day?
I think the awareness thing, that if you can help communicate to the people within your communities, and I'm not just talking to you, Luke, I'm talking to everyone who's listening. I mean, the idea here in having decentralization as a power to the people, actual power to the people, that is not just slogans. That needs to be something that is in the back of your mind at all times when you're consuming technology products. And I think that needs to be said more. It needs to be communicated more, and it needs to be, engrave it on your liver, is what my old teacher used to say. Anyway.
Okay, well said. But anyway, Pandu, thanks for your time. Have a good evening doing whatever you're doing, and I will chat with you soon.
Thank you. Take care.
Right, be good. See you soon.
Bye.